Phelps in Baltimore, and Skins coming to town this evening. Luke Jones on the scene tonight. I will be joining him at the Purple Crab Cake. Luke, I don't know that I've ever seen as many giveaway tickets and deeply discounted preseason tickets as I'm seeing here this week. I think the word has caught on that this is not going to be a very attractive game, but from a tactical standpoint, from a football standpoint, from a who's going to play and who can play, pretty important game if you're watching along with Brian Billick tonight, right?
You mean you're not excited to watch Ryan Mallett play?
Well, I am excited to see if they can run the football a little bit. And I don't put a whole lot of stock into the Redskins, right? So then there's the other side. Well, is the other side trying as hard? What players are they using? I mean, this whole thing's a disaster. The commissioner of the league sat there last week and called it a disaster. Now, I know he was positioning for 18 regular season games. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But either way, this isn't worth the money we're paying. It's not worth the jam, as they say, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no question about that. But as you pointed out, with the running game specifically, it gives you some context. I mean, these guys, this coaching staff has been evaluating these players going back to spring workouts, and this is your first opportunity to get some context with those evaluations because all these players have been practicing against each other. The offensive players are familiar with the defensive plays. The defensive players are familiar with what they're doing on offense. And now you have a different opponent, albeit a vanilla one because none of these teams game plan, I guess, unless you're Chip Kelly coaching the Eagles against the Ravens a couple of years ago.
In a scrimmage.
Which did not go over very well. Yeah. But it just gives you a chance to evaluate some guys against players that they're not as familiar with. So it's a snapshot. It's a part of the evaluation process. No decisions are going to be made based off of the preseason opener, just like no decisions are made over the first couple weeks of camp. But it's just it gives you a new piece of information, especially on those rookie free agents, those rookie draft picks, those second and third year guys that haven't really played and established themselves in the league just yet. It gives you a chance to see if what you've been seeing in practice is real. We've talked a lot about guys like Quincy Adebojo and Patrick Ricard and Tim White and all the Ravens draft picks this year, and this is your first opportunity to see them against an unfamiliar opponent. So from that standpoint, there's some intrigue, and I think, especially with Joe Flacco not playing in the opener tonight, there's really a sense of, okay, where are you with the running game? But even that becomes complicated because we're not going to see Alex Lewis, who's been out with an injury of some sort here over the last week. I'm not sure if we're going to see Marshall Yanda, more so coach's preference than an injury for him. They're just bringing him along slowly with the shoulder surgery in the offseason, and Austin Howard hasn't practiced yet. So potentially, as much as we want to see what this running game looks like, they may be without 3/5 of their starting offensive line come week one. So how much are we going to really glean from it? Probably not a whole lot, but you'd like to at least see some good things from some of your young players and some of those young guys that have kind of popped during practices. You want to see that translate with the bright lights of a game on.
Well, I know you wrote a piece out at WNST.net, things to look for and players to look for. You just dropped a handful of names. My man Quincy from Ole Miss, Hotty Toddy, doing the Rebel Yell. There are only so many position, players that are of starting caliber on the field. So the star of the game tonight will not be Mike Wallace or Terrell Suggs. It will be some Bobby Rainey kind of character, right? I mean, that's by nature. But, is Mallett going to play any extended period of time? I mean, I guess the third and fourth quarter, it's really going to be a mess out there tonight, right?
Yeah, I would imagine the third and fourth quarter. I mean, you're going to see Dustin Vaughn, who has had his moments here and there where he looks okay, but for the most part, not someone that you would look to as even a viable number two. Questionable whether he'd be a viable number three on a team that carries three quarterbacks during the season, which we know the Ravens haven't done that for a long time. I think we're going to see Ryan Mallett for most of the first half. I mean, Harbaugh indicated, I think it was Monday, that Mallett will probably play pretty extensively. And part of this is you want to see what he looks like. I mean, there was, obviously the Kaepernick discussion was such a big part of the first week to 10 days of camp, but there was no sugarcoating how ugly Mallett's performance was over those first few practices. Now, how much of that was just lack of familiarity with some of the other guys that were on the field and dealing with what's supposed to be a really talented Ravens defense and hearing those distractions? I'm guessing there was something to that, but he has practiced better since then. You'd like to see that translate to some degree. I don't expect Ryan Mallett to throw for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, but you'd like to see him show some semblance of command of the offense. You'd like to see him show at least some modest production, and I think if those things happen, it quells some of the short-term concerns. I mean, it's not going to make anyone feel completely better until Flacco's back out there and proves that he's healthy with the back, but you'd like to see Ryan Mallett, who, by the way, is in his second full year, third year overall with the Ravens.
Right.
He should have a decent command of what you're supposed to do. Now, can he execute it at the same level as Joe Flacco? No.
Throwing to Quincy Adebayo as well, right?
Right.
And being protected by who knows.
Exactly.
Right?
But you don't want to see him looking like he doesn't know what he's doing. And that's something, if that's the case, I'm guessing you're going to hear a lot more discussion heat up regarding Colin Kaepernick. But if he can at least go out there and look competent and, move the team a little bit, maybe put up a few points on the scoreboard, you feel a lot better about that situation in general because, as I pointed out, and you and I have talked about this a lot, the Ravens re-signed this guy on the first day of the free agent signing period. It's not as though, they looked elsewhere and decided to sign him in June when they explored other options. That, to me, signals that they have some level of confidence in him to be their backup. And, okay, maybe it's not the same level of confidence that knowing that Joe Flacco's health is in question, but if you thought the guy can't play whatsoever, then why'd you re-sign him so quickly? So I think you just want to see him look like he has a clue out there. How's that?
Well, we saw Jeremy Zuta get released by the 49ers, and you have identified Ryan Jensen as a guy to watch, and obviously I have a great fondness for Ryan, who came out and did a show with us last year and is a Colorado guy, and sort of in the Mike Flynn vein, but from Colorado, and trying to make his way and trying to learn this position and trying to be good at it, and just the fact that they've opened the door for him to be able to do this means that they do see things in him that they like. Now, did we like him as a starting left guard last year? No, it wasn't last year wasn't the best look, but I always say this about offensive linemen and defensive linemen. They do get better. They do learn assignments better. They do learn technique better. They do get stronger, especially when they're younger. This is a really nice opportunity for him in an organization where he might not have gotten this opportunity everywhere.
Sure. And to your point, he better have gotten better because, this is by far the clear favorite that's on the roster right now. As much as many have clamored for Nick Mangold, and I don't think the door is completely shut on that, I don't think it's necessarily a good bet either. One, they don't have a whole lot of cap space. So in the case of Ryan Jensen, he's someone that's bigger, more physical than Jeremy Zuta, and that's something that they were looking for in terms of revamping this running game, revamping the blocking schemes with Greg Roman coming in. They wanted someone with a little more size. Jensen's 320 pounds. He's 6'4". That's markedly bigger than Jeremy Zuta, who, as you mentioned, was released on Wednesday. And could the Ravens consider him to bring him back at a cheaper rate for veteran depth? I think it's possible, but that decision to, at first they were going to cut him, and then ultimately they traded him to San Francisco to move up a handful of spots in the 6th round. That was more about performance than salary. So, to me, if you decided to make the move to cut Jeremy Zuta, essentially, even though you ended up getting a song for him by moving up a few spots with your draft pick, you better have confidence in Ryan Jensen, even if you were anticipating that competition with John Urschel. So, again, not necessarily going to be his only, kind of judgment day, so to speak, but you want to see him look competent. You want to see him kind of leading the offensive line because, let's face it, there's a good chance Marshall Yanda's not going to be out there. And when you think about it, yeah, you do have Ronnie Stanley, who we already kind of think of as a veteran, but Ryan Jensen, there's a good chance he's going to be the most accomplished offensive linemen out on the field in terms of years of service, maybe not in terms of games started. So this is a guy that, as you pointed out, they do feel has gotten better. I think he's looked solid in practices. Haven't seen him have major issues necessarily, but you want to see how he fares against that Washington defensive line, and this will be his first test that doesn't involve going up against his own teammate. Matt
Judon, another player that we saw a little bit of last year in some flash, certainly looks the part, and no McClellan, no Doomerville. Here come the changes, and he will be a guy out there running around. He'll be on the field long enough to potentially make a play or three, right?
Yeah, I mean, McClellan's still around, but it feels like they've been using him more at inside linebacker this year, at least from a depth standpoint. He's certainly someone who can play that spot, but you're not going to get the upside there. I mean, the interesting thing with Matt Judon, he was a situational pass rusher last year. Remember, he was wearing number 91. Just by looking at his body alone, he reminded you of Courtney Upshaw. Just a bigger, massive guy. You look at him this year, and everyone's going to get a chance to see him tonight. Whether you're at the game or watching it on television, you're going to see a guy that is much leaner. I mean, he lost a solid 15 pounds, if not a little bit more.
We went from being like an O-lineman to being a linebacker, body-wise, right? Literally.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it looks like. And, it really, because they're looking at him to be their Sam linebacker. I mean, this is the guy they're looking to be Jarrett Johnson, pretty much. He wants to be strong to set the edge, but you want him to have enough agility that he can drop into pass coverage. Not that he's going to do that a ton, but when he needs to do it, he needs to do it capably. So I think Matt Judon's a guy who they're looking to be one of their most improved players from a year ago. He flashed. Yeah, he had a few sacks, 4 sacks as a rookie, but was generally a situational pass rusher. And now they're looking at him to be much more of a 3-down kind of linebacker. Now, will other edge rushers like Tim Williams be in the mix as well? Sure, but they're really, I think they would like to see Matt Judon become a guy who has 7 or 8 sacks instead of 4 and can set the edge well and can drop into coverage when need be and can be a guy that, especially with Terrell Suggs being a year older and not knowing if he's going to be able to play quite the same workload, they're hoping that Judon can be someone who can play most of the snaps over the course of a 60-minute game. So I think he's someone who is really intriguing, and I think he's someone they have high hopes for. As much as we've talked about the revamped secondary, the team needs to get a better pass rush. I mean, that was, other than Jimmy Smith's health, that was probably their second biggest problem in general on defense last year, and they were able to overcome it for large portions of the season, but they need to get after the quarterback much more than they did a year ago, and Matt Judon, they are counting on him to factor very heavily in that equation.
Last guy that you've pointed out, I mentioned Mike Flynn sort of, off the cuff and comparing him to Ryan Jensen, but on the defensive side, they have a Maine Black Bear who is from Massachusetts who has had his name dropped a whole bunch. Is it Ricard or Ricard? And I saw Joey Ricard getting the line drive off the head, or the pitch off the head on Wednesday afternoon. Ricard or Ricard? I know it was Alan Ricard back in the day.
I know coaches have called him Ricard, so I think we're going to go with that until he makes the team and he has the courage to correct it.
I'm going to find him and ask him after the game.
But, Patrick Ricard is someone that is in a very deep positional group. I mean, we've talked about the defensive line, all these players that the Ravens have collected. And I'm not talking Brandon Williams, who obviously is a real proven, strong, above-average nose tackle, who's probably going to play more 3 technique this year, actually, because of Michael Pierce. But we get in this time of year as reporters, we ask about all different players, and what's the response? It's always positive because coaches aren't going to be negative this time of year unless it's someone who's really
started a fight.
Bad or someone who's really been jaking it. So what you really listen for are verbal cues, and one of those cues being someone who's brought up without being prompted. And Patrick Ricard has been brought up by coaches on a couple different occasions as someone that has impressed. He's 6'3", 304 pounds. I've seen him line up at nose tackle. I've seen him at 3 technique. I've even seen him outside at the 5 a couple times. And he looks like an NFL defensive lineman. Strong against the run, stands his ground there, takes on blockers. I've seen him make plays. I mean, I'm not saying this guy's the next J.J. Watt. I don't want anyone to misconstrue, but to me, he looks like someone who has a chance to be at least an NFL rotational defensive lineman. And when you consider the fact that the Ravens traded Timmy Jernigan, lost Lawrence Guy in free agency, they're looking for a couple players to step up to fill meaningful roles. And that doesn't mean a starting role necessarily, but he could be someone that makes this 53-man roster and gets himself into the rotation discussion. So, he's someone that has been impressive, really even going back to the spring, as much as you can tell from defensive line play when there's no contact. But especially since the pads came on, he's someone that he looks like he fits. He kind of looks like that Lawrence Guy, Justin Bannon kind of a player where doesn't do anything fancy per se, but just really looks like he knows what he's doing out there. And
you want him on the wall, as they say.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you look at him. To me, the way that Patrick Ricard has played, guys like Willie Henry and Carl Davis better be ready to show up in the preseason, or they're going to be looking over their shoulder.
All right, it's going to be a long evening, and we'll be up late, and then right when the game will be ending, the other game will be starting, and the Orioles going out to, as I refer to it, my favorite dump in Oakland. It really is my favorite dump in the whole world. And the A's stink, and the Orioles are – look, I've called them pretenders. I thought the Hellickson deal and the deal for Tim Beckham were – well placed if you really were good enough to win to begin with, right? And that would mean Bundy and Gosman and these guys need to pitch more like, they didn't all pitch that well in April. Bundy did, but some thoughts about the rest of this road trip, because the team tends to go off on the West Coast. They tend to not fare well there. We talked about 7-3 being something that would put them back in the pennant race. Well, you look up a couple days in, and the road is different than Camden Yards for this baseball team.
It is, and the biggest thing in Oakland they need to do is find their bats. They didn't score any runs in Anaheim. I mean, even the win on Monday night, 4 of those runs came on the Manny Machado grand slam. So they're just not swinging the bats very well. They pitched well enough to win in Anaheim. Certainly got a good enough performance from Hellickson on Tuesday night. Gosman was far from great on Wednesday, but he wasn't awful.
He gave a chance to win Wednesday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, he wasn't sharp, but...
They got 4 hits, man.
Right,
come on.
Against something called a Troy Scribner. A guy who's kind of in their rotation because they needed a warm body. And
they didn't draw a walk. That's the other side of that is for a team that doesn't walk much, they're just not getting on base right now.
This was their over-anxious because the guy throws 88, had a slow looping curveball that wasn't all that terribly impressive, and just lots of pop-ups to the infield, lots of bad at-bats. And when you don't even get a runner in scoring position, it's tough to win. Wellington Castillo's home run was their only offense, and Bobby Dickerson drew a lot of criticism in the 6th inning for sending Craig Gentry on a single from first base. Although he was off on the pitch, it was a bad send. I'm not saying I liked it, but at the same time, he saw the same terrible at bats that we all watched. If you're watching the game on Wednesday afternoon, so they need to find their bats in Oakland, as you mentioned. A's are not a good baseball team. They are second worst team in the American League. And they pitched poorly. That's a pitching staff that's a little bit worse than the Orioles. They haven't scored a lot of runs. So you need to win 3 out of 4 at a minimum. Anything less than that's a severe disappointment on the heels of having lost 2 straight in Anaheim. You look at the wild
card. You're not
seeing
Sonny Gray this weekend. We'll save that for next month.
Yeah, and right. This sets up. If you look at the American League wild card race, the Yankees are in control of that first spot for right now. But what's happened? Kansas City has fallen back. Tampa Bay has fallen back. And now Seattle is in that second wild card spot where the Orioles will be at the beginning of next week. So, it's still sitting right there for them. You look at all these other teams. As much as I'm not impressed with the Orioles, and as you labeled them pretenders, I don't have a problem with saying that. But the thing is, you could kind of call all of these second wild card contenders pretenders. They all have negative run differentials. They've all been no better than 2 or 3 games above 500 for the most part, although Kansas City had been better than that, but they've severely fallen off since they were swept by the Orioles, not that terribly long ago. So it's still sitting there for one of these teams to kind of take off, and maybe this is the start of it for the Seattle Mariners. But I feel like you could have said that a few other times this year, and then they stubbed their toes. So the Orioles, they got to take care of business this weekend in Oakland. I mean, this is not a good baseball team that they're facing. They should have every opportunity to at least win 3 out of 4. You do that, you're back to 500 as you go to Seattle, and who knows? Maybe at that point you fare well against the Mariners. Maybe the Orioles are on the cusp of becoming the second wild card leaders. So they got to swing the bats better because they pitched. Their pitching was more than good enough for them to have a sweep, or at least win the series. Let alone ended up losing 2 out of 3. I mean, that just was not a good development, especially after winning the opener on Monday night.
Luke will be at the Ravens-Redskins game tonight. I will be joining in. We'll be locker rooming. We'll be tweeting. We'll be opining. You'll be yawning. And as I just tweeted, Luke, I said, fake football with the Redskins and Wade Miley starting a late game in Oakland. Good morning, Baltimore. Have a good day, Baltimore. So we'll see you tonight, and we'll be out and doing all the things that we do. Big night, right? Plenty going on around here. Again, it would feel nicer if the Orioles were really in the pennant race instead of just sort of toying around with the concept of being 2 games under 500. But big weekend out in Oakland. Ravens getting it going tonight, and we finally have a chance to come down to the stadium and see something that looks like competitive football. He is Luke Jones, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. I am Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and anywhere we travel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.